me today. And tonight we're going to be talking about relationship blueprints, which for me is, I think it's probably the most useful tool for working with not just relationships, but individuals in coaching. So many things that we struggle with as grown-ups can be traced back to our relationship blueprints, childhood years 0 to 7. And because we often we're so busy going about our lives, we're dealing with certain things that come up, whether that's relationships with our manager, whether relationships with our partners, with our children, and so on, that we often don't stop to actually notice that this is Groundhog Day, this is deja vu, this is, hang on a minute, I'm the common denominator in all of these circumstances, so how can it be the other person's fault now? You know, there's a point at which we stop noticing, we haven't noticed that, hang on a minute, how is it even possible to attract the same relationship this many times? You know, it then becomes, oh, well, that must be what all women or all men are like. So there's also sort of beliefs that we end up having as grown-ups that explain why we experience the same patterns over and over again. But actually, when we understand about our relationship blueprint, so much becomes clear. And it's one of those like, oh, God, that makes so much sense. One of those moments. And if there's a not just in your relationships, but if there's a block in your career, then blueprints are worth having a look at as well. So quite often I'll get, I do tend to have mostly women as my coaching clients, some men, but mostly women. And guaranteed, if a woman has got a block in her career, she runs a business or self-employed, guaranteed it goes back to blueprint with mum. So looks at her relationship with her mum, like guaranteed. Same with a guy and his dad. If he's got blocks in his career, you know, guaranteed that there'll be some relationship issue between them and dad, and that's blocking it. And when we kind of unveil the grown-upatized problems that we think we have, and we actually just go straight to this 0 to 7 imprinting period where we're downloading all these programs about how to survive when we grow up. We just cut to the chase and we go there. We see it really obviously, and then we can do something about it. So that's just the overview. Let me just get some slides going, just to give you something else to look at. All right, so does anyone have any questions so far about blueprints, anything I've just said before I sort of crack on with talking about them?
I've got one. How long on average does it normally take someone to unprint?
Well, it depends on, right, so this is really important, the difference between NLP and any other kind of system for working through the challenges in your life. So in NLP, we do not trawl through your childhood. Mm-hmm. This is so important because there's so much in there. You know, when anyone says to me they had a happy childhood, I look at my own son who's currently teething and miserable, and I think, okay, what you mean is in general it was fine. Because there are days where it's really hard to imagine that he's happy, even though he's got everything he needs. And so we don't need to trawl through everything that happened to you as a child. But if you go to, let's say, you know, to therapy, you will trawl through everything. And we do not need to do that. It is not pleasant. How long does it take somebody to unprint? Well, we look at it in kind of numbers of sessions related to numbers of problems. So for one problem that you're experiencing, we probably look at that as one piece of the blueprint that we need to re-imprint. And we call it re-imprint rather than unimprint. You got to put something else in there. You can't leave a gap. So yeah, so we look at it as what's the main issue. Let's find the cause of that and re-imprint that. there's very few people that have got more than 3 major things going on. So then it's more superficial stuff. Then it's more, you know, maintaining, creating momentum, whatever you want to do after that. But most people have got about 3 core issues that they need to work on, and those could either be ones that are ruining their life or just causing a few problems. But no, we don't need to trawl through anything. So when I talk about childhood and 0 to 7, that's just where we find it. We don't have to dig all of it up. We just go there like with a fishing rod, and we pick out the bit that's absolutely essential, and it's usually like a scene of your childhood as opposed to a period of your childhood. So that will all be explained. But actually the biggest shift comes often for people when they recognise it, when they can suddenly draw the dots and realise that, oh my God, that explains everything. And then there's this relief, like, oh God, so I'm not crazy, I'm not broken, I'm operating on actual parameters that are set in my subconscious mind. Oh, that makes so much sense. And then we just reset those parameters, essentially. All right. So part 2 then is imprint. So why are we interested in blueprints? Well, basically because they're the source of all of our problems. And if we just cut to the chase and go straight there, it makes our life a hell of a lot easier, frankly. So let me just explain what they are and where they come from and what I'm actually talking about when I talk about a blueprint. So between the ages of 0 and 7, you are in what we call your imprinting stage as a child. Your brain is in a perpetual state of hypnosis. So this is Maurice Massey's work from 1988. And he's incredibly useful as a tool for looking at the stages of development. But imagine that you are literally downloading everything that's happening to you between the ages of 0 and 7. Now, some people include conception in that 0. So it's up to you whether or not you take the 10 months of the womb, but I would definitely say you should take that 10 months because you're still experiencing things. You're downloading everything your parents are saying and doing, the way they're interacting with each other, the way they earn money, the way that they, bring home food, everything from a survival point of view that you would need as a child. If by the age of 7, think back to kind of prehistoric times, if your parents died before you reached full maturity, at least by the age of 7, you'd have everything you needed to take care of yourself, to be able to get water, get food, find a mate when you got old enough, and parent those children that you had as a result. So it's a really clever mechanism that that we've evolved to be able to not need our parents beyond a certain period of time. Because otherwise, can you imagine, if people didn't live, was it beyond, well, there's conjecture on the age of, cavemen and how long they'd lived, but it was a dangerous place to live. So if you had your first child at 20, you might not actually still be alive at 30. There's a lot of things that can happen to you. So it makes sense that whatever the children that you leave behind already have everything that they need. And rather than you have to remember it, it's been downloaded into your subconscious mind, into your blueprint. So this database essentially that is totally unconscious. Now, it's there because if you've ever had, how many parents have we got on the call? Quite a few. Okay, so have you ever heard, even not parents, but have you ever heard yourself saying something that your parents absolutely said and used to drive at the wall? And you were like, oh, I'm never going to say that. And then you did it, literally, it comes out of your mouth before you've even realised it. my dad used to pick fluff off the carpet. Like, we had a Hoover, but he would just come in and almost make a point of picking fluff off the carpet. And I found myself doing that one day, and I phoned my sisters just to literally say, oh my God, I have just picked fluff off the carpet. And they fell about because they thought it was hilarious. And I was like, oh my God, what else am I doing? That, you know, what else have I inherited through this blueprint? So you know that you've got a blueprint because it's these automatic things that you do without thinking. But obviously it goes a lot deeper than that. Okay, so this is the next really important bit. The blueprint is there to help us find a mate and procreate and then parent the same way that our parents did. Now, a lot of you would think, God forbid that I would parent the same way that I was parented. But if you think about it, nature doesn't care if you got, you know, that My Little Pony for your birthday and you were devastated because you didn't, and you thought your parents sucked. Nature just said, look, did you survive to adulthood, yes or no? Because if you did, it was successful. So you could have been beaten every day of your life as a child. If you survived it, how does nature know that that wasn't part of it? How is nature supposed to know that that wasn't why you survived? So nature doesn't care, nature doesn't ask a question, just as if you're alive, whatever your parenting was successful, because you're alive. So it's a way of, if it was terrible parenting, as nature would see it, not as we would see it, but as nature would say, if it's terrible, you don't survive to adulthood to procreate in the first place. So this is how nature would select good parenting. But of course, we would say, well, yeah, but there's good parenting and there's good parenting, isn't there? So now we're a lot more fussy about what we would like to call successful parenting. But nature still doesn't care. So it's still doing the same things it's always done. The difference is, nowadays we have, you know, massive self-help sections in bookshops. We have lots more role models on the TV to know what's right and wrong. And if you are aware enough as a child, you know, after the age of 7 or 8, to be able to say, well, I'm never going to do that to my kids, then you can start to change it. You can start to add in your own bits and pieces to your blueprint, but you have to have done it on purpose. Otherwise, it's just there subconsciously. It's just waiting for you to have children. Or find a mate is what we're really sort of interested in at the moment. The parenting one is coming in a few weeks' time when we'll do the parenting one. All right, so the patterns that we've experienced, the patterns in people that we've experienced between 0 to 7, tend to become our adult patterns. So, for example, you know, if somebody feels that they're always rejected, that will be a pattern that is familiar to them from childhood, and then they grown-upatize it into different environments when they grow up, but it's like this common theme for them. It could be a common emotion for them, so sadness, for example, or frustration. These themes that we experience as children in the family unit, then we kind of grown-upatize them. And what I mean by that is, when you go to work and your manager behaves in a certain way to you, you see it through the same lens as you would as a child. So you see someone, you know, leaving without notice and not saying goodbye to you as abandonment or rejection, if that's what you've experienced as a child previously and not resolved. Whereas someone else might not even register that they've gone, but for you, you took it personally, that was hurtful of them to leave without saying goodbye. If that's an issue for you or elsewhere. So every interaction, we call it perception is projection, so I'm not sure if Nick mentioned that before, but it's a little bit like seeing, we see the whole world in terms of what we've experienced before. So rather than taking a new situation as a new situation, our brain desperately wants to feel like it understands what's happening. So it says, well, how is this like something I've already experienced? And then kind of literally kind of brings to the buffer everything to do with what looks similar to that. And then we act as if it's really happening the way that we think it's actually happening. Which ties in with what Nick talked about last week in terms of when we have an expectation or a belief about someone, we keep interacting through that belief, and that person can't change because we refuse to let them change because we're so firm in our belief that they're like that we keep behaving as if it's true and keep eliciting probably the behaviour from them. So we do project the role models that we've grown up with, and again, the primary caregivers predominantly, but siblings can also factor in as well, onto the people that we meet. So I get managers tell me all the time, and they're always, having done leadership and management training for 15 years, they are always gobsmacked by the behaviours that they see in perfectly nice grown-ups. When someone says, right, here's a manager and they're in charge of you, they're in charge of whether you do well here, essentially whether you stay here and pay your bills and so on, but this person's now in charge of you. And for a lot of people, the only other reference point that they have for someone having that much power over them is a parent figure. So they project their experience of a parent figure onto the manager and then assume that the manager's going to be like that. So you can often, some managers will say, why can't they just be nice? Why can't they just get along? Why can't they just do what I'm asking them to do? Well, because they're not playing in the world that you're operating in. They're having their own drama with a character that essentially you're playing for them. And we have no idea this is happening most of the time. People are absolutely convinced that they're seeing certain behaviours in a manager that they're not seeing. And if they don't see them, they'll often provoke them. Because it's very uncomfortable to have somebody with power over you that you can't figure out. It's much easier to assume, subconsciously assume that they're like someone that you've already met and act as if they are. And then when you don't get the right behaviours, start provoking them until you see, oh yeah, there you go. Oh, there it is. That's better. I can deal with that. So it's completely subconscious, but managers will say, yeah, I do. I feel like I'm being provoked by this person to be someone I don't think I am, but they really rile me. And it's like, well, yeah, probably they've had a very strict or authoritarian parent, and you being all nice to them is freaking them out. So they're pushing boundaries until you tell them how it is, and then they're like, oh, okay, cool, I can relax now. Now I know what's happening. So there's all sorts of things that go on with being a manager, but essentially parenting skills is probably your best bet rather than, necessarily learning lots of models. Just learn how to parent, like foster kids or something. So this is one of the reasons why we get into a mess, is because we project those figures onto our partners as well. So then if we don't see them, then we provoke them potentially. This is why, if you ever need any evidence of this, because people kind of were like, well, that's not possible. You can't turn someone into a different person. Well, you're not turning them into a different person. You're putting them into a different state. You're triggering them, for example. So recently I listened to a group of people telling me how amazing my dad was. And they were sort of saying, oh, he was the most patient person I've ever met. He was loving and gentle. Oh, so much time for everyone. So loving. And I was like, are we talking about the same? For a minute I thought, no, we're not talking about the same person. He was really strong, blunt, aggressive, took the piss out of people, maniacally. Was had a great sense of humour, but wow, he really? That's how you saw him? But of course, I grew up in the family home with him, where him and my mum were constantly triggering each other and causing problems and stress and all kinds of things. So it wasn't that my dad wasn't that sort of person. He just had no reason to be triggered by those people and act that way. So he probably was that really great person that they're talking about in that relationship. But in my dad's, my mum and dad's home, where they were reliving their own childhoods essentially with each other, they were all triggered, you know, every which way. So I tended to see the worst traits brought out of my mum and dad. So that's what I'm talking about here. Is it's, you know, you can start out a relationship and feel like you're one way, and then before long you feel like you're being triggered and provoked into behaving in a different way that isn't quite you. And it isn't that it's not you, it's just that's what that person is used to, and therefore they are unconsciously, totally subconsciously provoking it without realising they're doing it. So if I'm coaching someone on relationships, the common temptation is to talk about the actual, let's say it's a couple, you know, the temptation is to actually talk about the couple. And there really is no point to a larger or, you know, or lesser degree, because when the person is having the experience, they're not really interacting with that person. They're interacting with their past. And until you have removed the frame, the filter, the drama, the story, what they are reenacting, they can't even see the real person for who they are. So in the case where, you know, there is obvious mistreatment, let's just say, then that doesn't really, you know, that may, you know, you may have to help the person leave a relationship like that. But again, the reason why they haven't left the relationship is more likely to do with their blueprint than it is any other reason. So fear of being on their own, or, you know, and all kinds of fears come up. So when I'm coaching someone on relationships, this is usually the way that it will go. So I'll say, okay, tell me about the problems that you're experiencing. And again, it could be a partner, it could be a manager or a friend, or sometimes a sibling as well. So it can be all kinds of things. But usually a sibling's a bit more obvious where it comes from. So then I ask questions. Okay, so what's your perspective on what's actually happening? So not what the other person is doing, but, you know, kind of sum up to me what you think is going on actually. So what's the interplay? What's the actual situation here? What, in their own words, what they think. What emotions keep coming up for them, and that's critical. That's part of the pattern, that's part of the theme. I want to know what emotions they keep experiencing. What beliefs keep coming up for them, you know, like in terms of what they think is happening, that's going to be related. So what do you believe is happening here? What do you believe about you? It might be, I'm not good enough, people don't care about me, people leave me in the end, I'm always on my own, whatever it might be. What do you believe about the situation? So, you know, it's, well, he's being unfair, or she's being a nag, or she's being critical, whatever it might be. And what do you believe about, that would be about the person, and then the situation would be, we can't communicate, we don't get on. What's the actual situation? And then really simply, after a lot more sort of probing around the specifics, I literally just say, so what situation does this remind you of from your past? Now, I might be more specific than that if I know, for example, if it's a manager, best question ever, if you're a coach, best question ever is, who does this person remind you of from your childhood? If you don't want to go straight into the childhood aspect, then just say, what person does this remind you of from your past? And they might give you someone sort of still as a grown-up. You're like, anyone else further back maybe? And more often than not, and I was even in, I literally went for a consult for executive coaching, and the person there said, I just really want to work on my ability to handle passive-aggressive people. And I thought, oh, hello. Right, so tell me, I said, describe to me what who are we talking about? Because I'm pretty sure there's not more than one. So tell me, who are we talking about? And it was a colleague, like who was more senior than them, but they said, I really struggle because they're really passive aggressive. And I really struggle with it. So I said, okay, good. Great. So who does this, when you really think about it, who does this person remind you of from your past? And she's like, oh, no one. I've never had this happen to me before. It's like, are you sure about that? Think harder. Who does this person, how do they make you feel? And immediately, right, so the moment, rather than labeling the behaviour as passive aggressive, because that's a grown-up phrase, so how do they make you feel when you're interacting with them? And she said, oh, I just feel helpless and scared. I said, great, and what does that remind you of? Who have you dealt with in the past that made you feel like that? And she went straight there to, oh, yeah, my dad. Now, for me, that just cut out the need for about 12 sessions of fanning about, talking about, right, well, have you tried this with this person? And what do you think you could say? And what do you think, how would you think you could bring it up with that person that they're being passive aggressive? Just, she deals with the problem. She doesn't have the resources to deal with passive aggressive people, because the first person that she experienced that made her feel like that, she was too little to do anything about it. Of course she didn't have the resource, and it made her feel scared and helpless. So all that's happened is the moment that she's triggered by a similar type of pattern of behaviour, she's gone into what we call the gestalt of, oh God, I feel scared and helpless, don't have the resource to cope with this, and she can't access all of her wisdom, her grown-up wisdom that she would like to be able to access to be able to cope with it. So for me, that is just cuts out all the nonsense. What are we actually dealing with here? It's blueprint stuff. Who are we talking about? Where's it from? And we just went straight there and dealt with it with some NLP. And we just gave her the resources to be able to deal with it. So she didn't feel scared, she didn't feel frightened. And then when I say, okay, so how would you deal with it differently now? She's not thinking strategy. She's not thinking, oh, well, what I do is, she's just like, it's just so not a problem, is it? It's just literally not a problem, because she's not feeling unresourceful anymore. So it's no big deal. It's not even, and what you tend to find is, because of the quantum physical nature of the universe and relationships, if you have something in your past, it keeps resonating. So you almost have to keep meeting people that bring it up for you, that resonate, that provoke it. So one of the characters from a book. So once you've resolved your own aspect of the blueprint, it literally disappears from your experience. You stop resonating with it, you stop projecting that character onto people, and you can cope a lot better. So for me, it solves a lot of problems. You don't need so many strategies to cope with all these different types of people. And you don't take as much time to get to the crux of it. You just go straight there and deal with it. So that for any coaches, that are listening, that is really, just to be honest, the simplest way to, provided you have rapport, obviously, and the person wants to talk with you about it, but it will save them a lot of time. Because otherwise, how do you deal with a passive aggressive person? It's just a waste of time. You change you. That's how you do it. Okay. All right. So this is now, if we start pulling this, into its pieces, we can then start to pull it apart. So So there's one option, which is just to say, okay, how does this person make you feel when they do X, Y, Z? What's, you know, and how familiar does that feel? Where was the first time you experienced that? And clearly you didn't have resources to deal with it then, and you don't now. But let's break it down into some of the mum-dad stuff. And again, I'm just going to talk about a family unit as mum, dad, and you as a child. Probably going to leave out the siblings for now. Obviously, some people would have had 2 mums, 2 dads, 1 mum, no dad, 1 dad, no mum, a granny, and so on and so on. So rather than make it complicated and do all eventualities, when I say mum, what I mean is your primary female caregiver. Okay, so if you are if you're a woman and you identify as female, it will be your primary female caregiver that I'm talking about. What we find is the relationship with a woman and her mother is critical for teaching her how to show up as a woman in the world. So, because if you think about it, when you're little, your caregivers are your gods. They are your universe. They are everything to you. They are so incredibly powerful, and you're biologically programmed to love them, no matter what. So how that individual treats themselves, so if your mum was very self-critical, so critical of herself, she may be completely confused as to why you have so low self-esteem, even though she praised you. Well, it's because you were looking to her to tell you, to show you how to be a woman. So where were you supposed to learn how to be a woman other than from your primary female role model? So if she was very self-critical, then it is likely that you have modelled, even if it's just a part of yourself, on that critical behaviour. So if you were aware of it. If she was then very critical of you, you will feel like the world is critical of you. So when I talk about blocks in career, for example, for a woman, it's a bit like when you have a career, it's the world, you're showing up as a woman in the world and at the world of work as a woman. And if you've experienced criticism, you will expect to be criticised and feel not worthy at work or in your relationship. So you show up as a woman in your relationship and at work and in the world as a whole and in your own life. And obviously, if we're talking about relationships, there's 2 parts to it. There's how you show up and how the other person treats you and how you treat them also. So mum, the female role model, is massively important for a woman because that's where most of what you've learned about yourself comes from. Now, here are some of the really cool questions that then you can start to draw some parallels. Now, remember, if you have consciously decided as a child that you're going to be different, you may have already altered your blueprint. So this is only if you haven't altered it already that you'll be operating in this way. Okay, so I'm simplifying it for ease, obviously, but these are some of the questions to ask yourself. So, as a woman, what did you want most from your mother but struggled to get? So was it attention, acceptance, love, praise, whatever it might be? And then these questions: who did you have to be to get what you wanted? So who did you have to be to get love, acceptance, praise, whatever it might be? So for me, it was to be accepted, to be to get what I wanted from my mum, I had to be academically good, but not too good, not better than her. So that was the sweet spot that I had to find, which was good, but not better than her. And who did you have to be? Loved. So what did you have to do? Firstly, were you loved? Like, does it not were you empirically, but did it feel like you were loved? Did it feel like you were liked? So I know my mum loved me, but I don't think she always liked me. And I didn't feel like she liked me. And then, so what did you need to do to be loved or liked? And what did you have to do to get attention? So when you start answering those questions, if you can remember, obviously, then you can start drawing some parallels here between how you show up in the world, how you show up in your relationship as a woman. Because ultimately, think about it, to show up in the world of the world or what the world of work or whatever, and expect to do well, it would be really nice if you'd been unconditionally loved to start with as a kid. If you'd had really great guidelines, had patience and love and understanding, not necessarily been told off, but helped to understand what you could do differently next time, and so on and so on. So great parenting would then set you up to expect the world to respond to you in a positive way. Whereas if you've had a critical parent, or if you've had a punitive parent, that then becomes your expectation. So my parents were very punitive, and for years I was really scared of making mistakes in my profession and getting told off like by someone, some weird entity that I didn't know existed. But that's why I tell people now there's no NLP police. When I coach people who might have similar concerns about doing things the right way, or it's like there are no NLP police, no one is coming to get you, do it how you want to do it. Whereas I was always worried about doing everything right, the right way, being a good girl. So these are just really useful things to think about. Okay. Now, what's interesting about what you wanted most from mum could be what you want most from your career. So attention, love, acceptance, and so on and so on. It could be what you want most from your other half. So if you're in a relationship, it could be that you didn't get what you wanted from your mum, but you desperately want it from someone. So it could be that you bring that into the relationship. But it's less likely that you would want it from your partner if you're a woman, and more likely that it's just something that you feel like you are failing at in some way, that you can't bring it into the relationship because you're not worthy of it, if that makes sense. So if you didn't get attention, let's say, from your mum, you would have wanted attention, but you might not feel that you were worthy of it. So you would come into the relationship desperately wanting attention, but not feeling worthy of it.
Jess. Quick question. So my mind is going to me being a mum as well, and thinking how I'm screwing my kids up.
Oh,
and
we're all doing it.
I know. I'm having so much fun while I'm doing it. But bringing up boys as well. So thinking about this is sort of your mum and your female caregiver. So am I asking myself those questions and then thinking about what that might mean for my boys as well in terms of what I'm bringing to them?
Yeah. So this is why you've got to basically think of yourself as you've got to kind of play the role, okay, I have to unconditionally love my child because they deserve it, right? So they deserve unconditional love. They deserve unconditional acceptance. You can be the only person in the world that thinks the sun shines out of their behind. Right?
They are amazing. They are completely amazing.
That is your total prerogative as a mother, right? To do that, because how they show up in the world as men is going to come from their daddies and their male role models. How they show up in a relationship,
right,
is going to come from their daddies.
Oh God, really? What's coming from me, for crying out loud?
I know, right? So all this effort you're putting in, Amy, totally wasted. So, but basically, who they choose as a partner, provided that they're heterosexual and they want a female partner, they'll pick someone like you.
Thank God. There must be some kind of silver lining.
There
So
you
how
go.
they're going to show up as men is how my husband...
Daddies have a huge responsibility. John Gottman is the authority basically on parenting, relationships, emotional coaching. I mean, he is incredible. He's done many 30 years of research. He is amazing. His wife never gets mentioned, and I don't even mention her. I can't even remember her name. That's terrible, isn't it? I'm so sexist subconsciously, obviously. But John is easier to remember. So he is phenomenal. But he basically says, this, and many other books as well that that are out there, like the Father Effect and things like this. Dads have a huge impact on kids, way more than the mother. Irritatingly enough, not just boys, but girls too. So it's
That was going to be my question. Is it the reverse for if you've got a girl, or is it still the same way round as for Amy?
Okay, so the pattern are reversed. So how your daughter shows up in a relationship will be down to you, and how you show up in your current relationship, and how she shows up, how you're teaching her to show up in the world by how you treat her. So if, for example, you're overly critical of your daughter, she'll be overcritical of herself. And then that's how she'll show up in the world, as overly critical of herself, and then in her relationship as well, overly critical of herself in the relationship as well. So in that respect, the mum's relationship is still about how she'll show up in the world, how she'll show up in the relationship, but the kind of guide, assuming again that she goes to a guy, will be based on her daddy and how he treats you and her. So the kind of man. So that's who we pick in terms of the behaviours and how they made us feel. But there's this whole other thing about dads and the way that they like to not have a dad there is, I'm paraphrasing here, to not have a dad there is better than having a bad one. Because especially for a boy, if there is a bad father present, it really affects that kid. So for those single mums out there that are like, oh my God, I've got to find some male role model. Yeah, that would help, in the same way as a woman, you'd want one. That's just really normal. But it's better to not have a bad one present than have any old one. So yeah, I mean, John Gottman is the authority, definitely, because he's got all the research and things like that. But ultimately, unconditionally loving them is the first stage. Like, as you can override a lot of damage done with unconditional love and patience. But also, everyone's got their own journey. You're gonna, like Amy, like we're talking, joke about screwing them up. But I can't make all the right decisions for my kid, even though I'm aware that I'm in the moment, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't be talking about this in front of him. But like, well, okay, that's really hard to try to try to do everything right is impossible. Which is why I write Rocky an email every day. So I write him an email as soon as he goes to bed, and before I go to bed, I write him an email and I explain everything I did that day with him. And I kind of like, right, okay, this is what happened today. You learned this word or whatever it might be. But I make an actual effort to tell him all the things in case he remembers them, what actually happened. So I say, you know, so mum and dad were cross with each other today, and we, you know, we had an argument in the car on the way to, you know, to have our walk or whatever. And this is my frustration with daddy, and this is daddy's frustration with mummy right now, but we're working through it. So hopefully by the time, like, he's 18 and he starts reading them, if he looks at us the way that we are then, and like, but you don't, why do I have all these feelings? It's like, well, read the emails, kid, because we screwed you up right back there, like, before we had a chance to kind of fix stuff. So sorry about that, but it's all explained in the emails, so enjoy. But at least that my explanations for my decisions are explained as well. So I'm deciding to do this because I believe this. If it's wrong, I apologise, but it's the best I can do. Because I can't do anything but what I believe, right? So that's why you know, he'll have a record of how he was screwed up.
I think the screw-ups get forgiven if there's love, though. Isn't there?
Well, when we do all of the re-imprinting work, remember the presupposition, a basic presupposition in NLP is, you know, people are just doing the best that they can. So it's very difficult. You can love someone and then, you know, make terrible choices. Or
difficult.
I was going to say again, sorry.
I was going to say, I think that's the difficulty, because like where Amy said around kind of like that, where my brain was going is like, oh God, what am I doing to my kids, sort of thing with it. So I'm very conscious of kind of what behaviours have carried through into my life in terms of like always doubting myself and that kind of thing. And I do know where that's kind of come from. And so I'm conscious every time if like my daughter does anything, I'm conscious constantly when I'm talking to her, am I doing this to her and stuff like that. So I sometimes find that I'm inconsistent because I'll catch myself going, no, this is the right boundary I should be saying, but I'm like, this might damage her. So it's like I'll twist it straight away sometimes afterwards. So she'll sometimes get away with something because I'm like, be a bit softer on that bit.
Right. And again, if the best thing that you can, how old is she?
She's 9 now.
Great. So she's old enough to understand that you're not perfect.
Yeah.
And the sooner that they get it and they understand that it's a team effort here, like we're both figuring this out. You've got to help me because I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. I am in charge, but I'm figuring this out, you know. So the sooner that you get to that level with them where you can say, look, I made a mistake, I think.
Yeah, which I do say that.
What do you think? And how do you feel, you know, if you even brought up, so if you were, for example, if you were self-critical and you heard yourself and you caught yourself doing it and you said, I don't know if you heard that, but I don't think I was very nice to myself just then. Do you think, do you agree? And then have a conversation about it and say, what should I do if I catch myself doing that, do you think? You know, and actually work it through. Because the other thing is when somebody says to me, oh, will you work with my kid? Will you fix them? Will you, you know, undo some things that have been done? And I say, well, how old are they? Are they still living at home? Because if they're still living at home, you are a parent. You have the power to absolutely change them because they're living with you. And the way to do it, same as all relationships, change you. They're just the mirror. So when you change something in you, they literally respond almost immediately. Because they are, as far as I'm concerned, they are the teachers here. They've come to you to point out where you've got some learning to do, where you've got some healing to do. And if you let them teach you, you will end up evolving and they will maintain their natural NLPs, their natural learners. So rather than trying to think, oh, I need to do something to them, I need to learn from them and change me. So that you allow them to be who and what they want to be. there is a difference between person and behaviour. So as long as you unconditionally love the person, you can talk about behaviours and what's acceptable behaviour and what's not acceptable behaviour, without taking your love away. That's important. So yeah, so now, guys, let's talk about dad. Now, the biggest problem that I hear is a lot of the time is that one partner is willing to talk about the relationship and the other partner is not. So I have equal numbers of men and women where the other party is not willing to work on it. Usually because they don't think there's a problem, rather than that they're just not willing to talk about it. They don't see what the problem is. And again, if you work on your blueprint, the problem usually resolves itself, because you can't escape the drama while you've got your blueprint running the same way as it always has. So for guys, what did you learn about how to show up in the world as a man from your father or male caretaker? Who did you have to be loved and accepted by your dad? Worst thing you never say to a dad is, right, you're the man of the house while I'm away. They are children. They are not supposed to be in charge of anyone. They're supposed to be children. And it will set up a lifetime of insecurity if you don't sort that one out. So guys kind of, you know, they want their kids to be men. So don't cry, don't, you know, but they don't let them be boys first. They've got to be children first. So what did you have to do to get attention from your dad? Oh, was that all it was? I'm sure there was more. Okay, doesn't seem to be more. But the same rules applies as for the girls. Who did you have to be? What did you have to do? What did you want most from him but didn't get? So his respect, acceptance, his attention. You know, did you want him to be proud of you? What is it that you wanted most but didn't get? And then this then becomes in your universe how you then interact with the world and what you bring into relationships. I'm going to talk in a couple of weeks' time. I'm going to talk about the masculine and feminine, which again is one of my absolute favourite subjects. So there's a lot of very strong, powerful women out there, and I know a lot of them, and it's very easy to emasculate men and then cause a problem because you don't respect them when they try to please you, or they act when they act emasculated, if you know, when they act unlike the man that you want them to be. So quite often when you challenge them, you want them to be, you know, step up and take care of you, or be more masculine, but they end up going the other way and end up sort of feeling like children, and then you get frustrated, even more frustrated with them because that didn't get you the result that you wanted. So I'll talk about the masculine and feminine and how you can use that to make it a relationship better. Okay, so girls and their dads. What did you learn about men growing up? Now that could be because of what your mum talked about men, or your direct experience of men. And again, who were men when you were little? You know, 0 to 7, it's probably going to be, you know, we're talking close family members, probably dad. Who did you have to be loved by your dad? What did you have to do to get his attention? How did he treat you? What did you want most from him but struggled to get? So remember, for me, my dad was all these things. You know, he was apparently the world's most loving, patient, kind, beautiful person, but could be triggered to huge anger and, you know, rage by certain behaviours from my mum and us, he was also someone who was very loving, but with conditions. So provided, you know, I learned that if I did X, Y, and Z perfectly, then I would get love and attention. If I didn't do X, Y, and Z perfectly, I would be rejected. So what did I learn about men growing up? Well, that they're controlling. You have to do what they want to do, otherwise you end up on your own and rejected. What do you have to do to get their attention? Be interested in everything they're interested in, because they're never ever going to like My Little Ponies no matter what you do. That's my personal learning. And then how did he treat you? And what did I want most from him but struggled to get? That was probably the hardest one to... Yeah, so I guess unconditional love, just to be accepted for me. I also wanted him to, because he never ever, like, we had 4 daughters, and he never told any of us that we were, you know, pretty, or that we looked nice, or, you know, that no man would ever be good enough for us. He never said that. But that matters. So, you know, that's one of those things that would have been nice to hear, because it's not in my blueprint. So what did you learn about women growing up? Who did you have to be loved by your mum? What did you have to do to get her attention? How did she treat you? What did you want most from her but struggled to get? Same sorts of questions. So what are you yearning for that you are hoping your partner's going to give you, essentially? Yeah. What did you never get as a child that you're hoping in some way that your partner's going to give to you? Now, when we get together, quite often, this is how you know you're operating on a blueprint. So some of the cues, let's say, some of the warning signs or red flags. If you had fantastic parenting and you'd be lucky to find someone as amazing as your dad, then that's fine. You don't have to worry. But if you think, oh God, I don't want my parents' relationship, that's awful, or I don't think I'd want to end up with either one of them, then watch for the red flags. The red flags are an incredibly highly emotional honeymoon period. So meeting someone and falling head over heels with them very, very quickly. The moving the relationship on very fast could be a sign that you are working on a blueprint. Purely because, you know that phrase when someone says, oh, it feels like I've known you for forever? You have. It's your parents, right? Run a freaking mile, right? If someone ever says that to you, I feel like I've known you forever, you just say, what was your relationship like with your mum? Just checking. And if you go, she is the world's best person, you're like, cool, we're going to get on really, really well. As long as I'm now the best person and not her, obviously. So that's a big thing. So Amy, you, me, and Rosie as well, and Emma, we're all going to be usurped at some point. And that's right that we should be, because I don't want to be living with my son when he's like 45, 50. 44, it's all good. 45 though, we better be out of here. And then I've figured it out, we're going to just go and live with him, because that's cool, right? So let your parents live with you, just still be living at home, really bad, but we'll always be together. That's how I've decided that we're going to manage it.
Oh God, poor Rocky.
Yeah, that's how I feel as we're going to do it. So we'll let him move out, but we'll just move in. And then he's like saintly because, oh, I let them live with me.
I like your style. I've really got to work out how I'm going to be a really good mother-in-law. Still working that one out.
Well, the problem is that he'll pick someone with similar traits to you, and then you'll see those traits in that person. And the old adage, you know, you spot it, you got it. You'll go, gosh, she's so bloody controlling.
Oh no!
And you'll be like, damn it! Oh no! Yeah. So it'll just be that she does it better than you. That's all. That'll be irritating. The other thing to remember is we often choose our partners because they have the promise of everything we never got as a kid. So they actually are capable of giving us everything that we wanted, everything that we want now. They have the ability to do it, because that's ultimately why we're choosing them. However, it's very easy, if you let the blueprint take over, to miss that. So, you know, my mum's most maternal woman you'd ever meet, right? She's just really great with babies, loves, you know, wants to cook, house, you know, lovely mother figure. My dad was sent to boarding school at 8 years old when his dad died. So loses his dad, suddenly he's isolated, no mum, no dad, you know, no dad, no parent figure. So when he meets my mum, who's already got a 4-year-old daughter, so he gets to see this beautiful, loving mother who's doting on her kid, and his brain goes, oh my God, I want that. I want to be in that unit. I want to be in that family. So essentially, he then has everything my mum needs. He's strong. He's, you know, he's hardworking. He's everything that could protect her. But her father was a total control freak, you know, super strict, beat them when they were bad, you know, really very authoritarian, punitive parent. So although she wanted and again, remember, people describe my dad, most loving man you'd ever meet, patient, kind, never raised his voice. So all of a sudden, she sees that version of him and thinks, oh my God, I want that strong, kind, patient, amazing, oh my God, I just want a man like that. And then they come together, and in one moment after they got married, my mum chose her daughter over my dad in a particular argument about something. My dad goes straight back to his childhood being rejected and goes into his, okay, well, I'm going to shut down. I'm not going to give you anything. I'm not going to love you because it's too hurtful. I can't be rejected again. So literally shuts off. That's the second day after they were married. And my mum is so taken aback by how suddenly the wall went up, like her own father, that then she closes down as well. And they spend the next 25 years pretty much operating on their original childhood blueprints. I mean, absolutely tragic is exactly the word for it, because they both were so close to having everything that they wanted. And if they had have just talked it through and gone, okay, what's coming up for you? Oh, I just feel like you're going to reject me, like I've been rejected before. Well, I'd never reject you. My God, we're just having an argument. So super, super sad. But it doesn't have to be that way. Or, you know, if you know you want to be with your partner and you know that at the beginning you felt like they were going to give you everything, they probably still can. It's just that they've got stuff coming up that you're provoking in their blueprint and they're provoking in yours. So if this is now the thing, so if you know NLP, right, then it's a lot easier to work on this by yourself. If you know NLP, then there's timeline techniques, there's something called re-imprinting, which is amazing, which is the technique I always use. So it's a specific technique for changing a blueprint. However, there's a lot you can do without knowing NLP. First of all, it's identifying what is coming up through the questions that we've done. Considering like, what is the drama that you're playing for each other? So what are the patterns? What are the dramas? What do you see happening here? How are you affecting that person? Then what do they do? And it's almost like a script at some point. Consider last week's session with the labeling. What beliefs and expectations do you have for this person that traps them in that behavior? So when you expect somebody to behave a certain way, you, by the Pygmalion effect, by your behavior, by your beliefs and expectations, keep them trapped doing it. And it's very difficult for them to escape the label. And then be really honest about what are your subconscious expectations and beliefs about relationships based on what's happened to you in the past, perhaps. So a common one for people is, I just have this feeling that they're going to leave me in the end. So they read into everything as if, oh, well, they're going to leave me anyway. For me, my parents stayed together for 25 years. like hating each other. So I really struggled to leave my first big relationship. It was 9 years long, and I knew after 3 months I didn't want to be with him anymore, because I just had this blueprint. You just don't leave. That's not what you do. You stick it out, because that's what I'd had demonstrated.
Yes.
So
just as a reflection, so as you're going through so many of these questions, I'm reflecting on my parents, and I've just been on the chat with my sister saying, God, we were so lucky, because our parents are having their 60th wedding anniversary next month.
Wow.
And they are just the most incredible team, and gave unconditional love to each other beyond any measure, and to their girls as well. So all three of us don't have any, challenges in terms of our self-worth or our self-belief, etc. We've been incredibly lucky, having so much love, unconditional love from our parents. And so I think it probably has the flip, it sort of has an unintended consequence of that, is no partner, in talking personally about myself, will probably ever meet the bar of the parental relationship that I have been exposed to all my life. That model that I've had.
Yeah, so there's other issues as well when you do have, this amazing team as well, is because remember, you're not in it. You're part of it, but you're not the couple. So sometimes when the parents are so in love, it can make the children feel a little bit excluded, let's just say, occasionally. And therefore they carry that into their relationship, and that can then end up with a familiar feeling of not being first, of not being someone's priority sometimes. Because there might be someone else in that person's life that they put first. So it's all dependent on what you experienced as the child rather than the parents. It's because you're not necessarily reenacting your parents' relationship. You're looking at how they interacted with each other and what the rules were, but how they taught you to show up in the relationship. So, and how into the world and in relationships. So there's so for example, this is a common one. So if your dad, because dads should absolutely dote on their daughters, like, the kindest thing you can ever do for your daughter is just dote on her and treat her like she's a princess, because you're going to lay the foundations for what she chooses and thinks she deserves later. If he's already doing that to another woman, it can paint a model of there's always someone else I'm competing with. Not always, but it's not always perfect, if that makes sense. It just depends on, because it's bloody hard to get it perfect. It's virtually impossible to make it perfect, if that makes sense. So yes, the parents should love each other, and then the children should bask in that unconditional love, definitely. Just to sort of sum up, what can you do? Because I don't want to leave you there with like, oh great, Jess, and now what do I do about it? So you've got to be aware of the patterns that are causing the problem, first of all. So identify, okay, every time I do this, what is actually happening here? What is that triggering? Because, for example, when Nick and I got together, it was amazing. We had the same experience as my mum and dad, in that it was utterly amazing. Literally, I got a text from Nick the day after we started going out with each other, and he was like, I'm so happy. And I was like, I know, me as well. We've been friends for a couple of years or whatever, and we were just like, I cannot believe that we're together. It's just ridiculous. It's perfect. It's everything I ever wanted. And then within a few days, I had blamed him. I'd been slightly cross with him because he got a parking ticket, and he was in charge of getting the ticket for the car park, and he didn't do it. And he kind of handed me the fine from the car, because I was running my course and he was assisting me on my course. And I was like, why are you giving it to me? Like, you got the fine because you didn't do the car park. And at that point, something triggered in him, like, she's cross with me. I wasn't angry. I was just like, what are you giving it to me for? I was blunt, but I hadn't been that way with him before, obviously, because we hadn't been in that zone. And all of a sudden, that was it. Wall went up. That was it. Wouldn't talk to me. Wouldn't communicate. And I was like, oh my God, all this rejection from childhood's coming up. Oh my God. And it was literally, that was the moment. So you've got to focus on the patterns and recognize he is not rejecting me. It felt like he was. It genuinely felt like, no. And categorically, objectively, he just rejected me. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified because he'd been abused physically abused by someone as a child, by his mum when she was cross. So he was terrified of me being cross with him. And that was not a rejection, that was terror. But I saw it as rejection because how was I supposed to see it any other way? That was my experience. When someone doesn't talk to you because you've just called them out on something, how was I supposed to know he was terrified? Do you see what I mean? All I could focus on was myself and my own feelings of being rejected. So the first thing you've got to do is be aware. You are having your own experience, and it probably bears no resemblance to what the other person thinks is happening. You are having your own little drama that is unfortunately playing right into the hands of the other person's drama, that's all. Try and work out what the problem is. The problem is I want or I need something, oh, sorry, I wrote that in a hurry, and I'm not getting it, and I'm prevented from getting it because. So what is actually going on here? Can you, put it in a nutshell? Come on. So find out what your partner's blueprint is if you can, to find out why they are being triggered. Why are they behaving the way that they are? Because whatever you think is happening probably isn't. They're being triggered in exactly the same way as you are. But if you can at least say that, if I'd have just been able to say at the time, honey, I know you think I'm angry with you, I'm really not. It's okay. I would never hurt you. And if I'd have been calm in that moment, we'd have been good. But what emotions do you think I had when he wouldn't talk to me? Just wild guess.
Upset. Frustration.
Oh, yeah, and the rest. So I was angry.
Mm.
So yeah. I ended up being angry with him because he closed down and I was pissed off with him. It was like, how dare you? And of course, all that did, him shutting down, made me more angry, which made him more terrified, which made him shut down even more. Because now I proved that he was right. Because I'd got angry, I'd proven him right that, oh, see, I knew she was going to do it. I knew that the other shoe, would what they call it, drop or whatever. I was waiting for it. I knew she had it in her. And I was like, well, yeah, but you provoked me. I wasn't going to get angry, but you behaved that way, and then I did get angry. But, I just fell into the trap because I had no idea what was happening. And all I was aware of was my own feelings. So try and figure out what the blueprint is, what's the experience, because only when I could see his pain could I get out of my own head about being rejected. I was so convinced I was. And then as soon as you see the person in pain the other side, it's like, okay, right, I'm not being rejected. You're terrified of me. Okay, what do I need to do to address that? And how do I change the label for you? How do I change my behavior? And then also try and remember that the reason that you've chosen each other is probably because you both have what the other desperately needs but doesn't know how to get. So there is possibly a way to work that.
Sometimes people don't know or understand or can't explain how they're feeling, particularly men. Sorry, but it's true, isn't it?
Well, that was the biggest problem that Nick and I had, was trying to get through to him, because he was so you know, his blueprint was so unpleasant that everything I did was interpreted, or everything I tried to do, every time I tried to work on it, he just was in fight or flight, like constantly. We had other people try and help, but just nothing. It just took a really long time for him to realise that I wasn't the enemy. There you go. What else can you do? So, what else you could do? So the tools of NLP, obviously, this is perfectly designed to re-imprint your blueprint. A re-imprinting session takes about 2 hours. It usually takes a bit less, but I give it 2 hours. And it's usually enough to shift a major issue in a relationship. Now, once you've done it once, you can usually do it again. You can do it by yourself. I've done, you know, re-imprints on myself, because just once you know the technique, it's just what you do. If you are considering it, I do recommend doing the practitioner training, because it's a lot better value for money than doing coaching. Because if you do the practitioner training, you've got the skills for life then. So you know how, you know, you've been taught everything, you know how to do it for yourself. Whereas if you have coaching, you're always reliant on having to have coaching. And I'd much rather people had the tools to do it themselves. Plus, once you've done your practitioner training, you know lots of other practitioners who can help you and practice with. So that's another benefit. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me tonight. So I think that to summarise, I think hopefully in a positive way, I know that you know, it seems like sometimes that it's because it's a subconscious thing, it feels like it's bad to have programs running in your subconscious mind. But on the plus side, they are actually fairly easy to change. You know, you're not stuck with anything. Everything can be changed, and changing it is very simple. So it's usually about having the right tools, the willingness to have a look at it and be a little bit courageous. We're not talking years, we're talking, you know, a few hours, but ultimately everything that you want from a relationship, that you dream of having from a relationship, is utterly, utterly doable. Whether you're in the current relationship or you haven't got one yet, the secrets are there for you in your blueprint, and you can change them. So that is the positive thing to remember, that it is all possible, no matter what. So thank you very much. Next week we're going to be Nick's going to be talking about emotional intelligence in relationships, and how to increase your emotional intelligence, which I think is always a very, very good thing. And then the week after that, I'm going to be doing emotional needs, so making your relationships great and amazing. And then I'm going to be doing intimacy and masculine and feminine stuff. So we're going to get to sexy time, which is, you know, I've left the last bit, the best bit till last. But yeah, you don't want to miss out. That's going to be great. And on that note,
yes, it's really
powerful. On that note,
Thanks, Jess.
an
Thanks
instruction.
very much. Thank you.